The bolt cutters made a sound like a heavy sigh, a dull, metallic clench that was completely out of place in the 6:42 a.m. stillness of the woods. I stood on my porch, the ceramic of my coffee mug warm against my palms, and watched them. There were 3 of them. 2 men I didn't know, one thick and sweating in a tool belt, the other thin and nervous, holding a clipboard like a shield. And then there was her. Brenda. She stood with her hands on her hips, a posture of belligerent ownership that she wore like a uniform. She pointed at the heavy brass lock on my cabin door, the one my father had installed in 1968. The thick man adjusted his grip on the cutters. "Mom, are you sure about this? This looks like a pretty serious lock." Brenda didn't even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on my door, as if it had personally offended her. "I am the president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. This property is in arrears. It has been legally foreclosed upon and sold at auction. You are here to secure the property for the new owner." She gestured with a flick of her head toward the nervous man who flinched. "Now get it done." I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was a good brew, a dark roast Eleanor had always loved. The steam curled up past my nose, carrying the scent of chicory and peace, a stark contrast to the scene unfolding on my lawn. They hadn't seen me yet. My porch was screened and set back among the pines, a place designed for quiet observation. For years it had been my sanctuary. Now it was a blind. I set the mug down on the railing, the ceramic making a soft click on the worn wood. I pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocked it, and swiped to the video camera. I pressed record, making sure the timestamp in the corner was clear. I walked down the 3 worn steps of my porch, my old leather boots making no sound on the pine needles carpeting the ground. I walked slowly, deliberately, not out of any sense of dramatic timing, but because at 72, a fast walk up the slight incline to the cabin was a recipe for a pulled muscle. I let them see me when I was about 20 feet away. The thick man stopped, the jaws of the bolt cutters half closed on the shackle of my lock. The nervous man took a step back. Brenda turned, and a slow, smug smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. "Well, well, Arthur, I was wondering when you'd show your face," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm afraid you're a little late. You're trespassing." I stopped about 10 feet from her, holding my phone loosely at my side, the lens pointed directly at her. I didn't say a word. My silence seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could have. "Did you hear me?" she snapped, taking a step forward. "This property no longer belongs to you. The association, in accordance with the bylaws you chose to ignore, placed a lien for your unpaid dues of $300. When you failed to pay the lien, plus the subsequent fines and legal fees, which now total over $5,000, we were forced to foreclose. The property was sold at a public auction last week. This gentleman," she gestured again to the clipboard man, "is Mr. Peters, the new rightful owner. You have 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. If you refuse, I will have the sheriff's department remove you." I kept my face impassive. I looked at the thick man with the bolt cutters. "What is your name?" I asked, my voice calm and even. He hesitated, looking at Brenda. I'm just from the locksmith company." "And your company is?" Brenda stepped between us. "You will not harass my contractors. They are acting on my authority," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I am the president of the HOA. This is association business." I raised my phone slightly, making it more obvious that I was recording. "So to be clear," I said, still in that same measured tone, "you are Brenda Walsh, president of the Lakeside Meadows HOA." "Of course I am." "And you are stating on the record that you have foreclosed upon and sold this property, parcel number 04-22-117-003, and are now attempting to forcibly enter it." Her face, which had been a mask of triumphant rage, flickered with a tiny, almost imperceptible moment of confusion at the parcel number, but it passed. buried under another wave of self-importance. I am acting with the full authority of the board. We followed the process. You were sent dozens of notices. I almost smiled. Notices. Oh, yes, I had the notices. Every single one. I looked past her at the brass lock she was so eager to destroy. It was a Schlag, a model they hadn't made in 40 years, a beautiful piece of machinery. Eleanor had bought it for my father as a gift. It was more than a lock, it was a memory. And this woman thought she could tear it from my door for $300. I finally looked directly into her eyes. You have no idea what you've done, I said, my voice still quiet. Then I turned and walked back to my porch, leaving her sputtering in the morning sun. I picked up my coffee mug. The recording was still running, uploading directly to a secure cloud server, a backup of a backup. She had just confessed to multiple felonies, including conspiracy, fraud, and attempted grand larceny, all before her first cup of coffee. She had no idea. She thought she was enforcing a bylaw. In reality, she had just handed me the key to dismantle her entire, petty kingdom. But before I explain what I did next, I need to explain how we got here. To understand the significance of that moment, of that lock, and the woman trying to break it, you have to understand the paper. My entire life, one way or another, has been about paper. Not the flimsy, disposable kind, but the heavy, authoritative kind. The kind that changes the world. I'm a retired land surveyor. For 45 years, my job was to translate the messy, complicated, three-dimensional world onto a two-dimensional sheet of paper, and then to take that paper and use it to impose order back onto the world. A survey isn't a suggestion. It's a statement of fact. This line is here. That boundary is there. Your property ends precisely at this iron pin I am driving into the ground. There's a finality to it that I always found deeply satisfying. You can argue with a person. You can't argue with a plat map recorded in the county courthouse in 1962. My wife Eleanor used to laugh about it. She said I was the only man she knew who would spend an hour reading a deed for pleasure. And she was right. I love the language. The thence north, 45 degrees, 12 minutes, 30 seconds east, a distance of 124.5 feet to a point of curvature. It was a kind of poetry, a poetry of precision. When we bought the land for the cabin, long before there was a lakeside meadows anything, I did the survey myself, my father and I. We walked the lines, drove the stakes, and drew the plat. It was a perfect rectangle, 2.5 acres carved out of a larger tract of timberland, fronting a small, quiet lake. The deed was recorded on a Tuesday in July of 1962. I still have the original. The paper thick and slightly yellowed. The ink from the county recorder's stamp, a faded purple. My father's signature is on it. And the developer, a man named Thompson, who owned all the surrounding land. It's a simple document, clean and absolute. This land belongs to the holder. Period. After Eleanor passed 5 years ago, the cabin became more than a retreat. It became a repository of memory. Every scuff on the floorboards, every nail I'd hammered into the walls, every stone in the fireplace we'd gathered from the lake shore. It was all part of a story. Our story. I lived a quiet life. I paid my taxes, kept my property clean, and bothered no one. My neighbors were, for the most part, the same. Decent people who valued the peace of the woods as much as I did. We had an informal agreement. Every spring we'd all pitch in a few $100s to have the main gravel road graded and new gravel laid down. It was a handshake deal, the way things used to be done. There was no association, no bylaws, no president. There was just us. Then, about 10 years ago, a developer bought the large tract of land Thompson had owned, the land that surrounded our original cluster of cabins. He put in a new subdivision, called it Lakeside Meadows, and built 50 new, identical-looking houses. And with those houses came an HOA. From the start, I knew it would be a problem. HOAs are a surveyor's nightmare. They create another layer of rules on top of the legal reality of deeds and plats, a layer of subjective, often petty, regulations enforced by amateurs. When the HOA was formed, I received a letter inviting me to join. I politely declined, sending them a letter back, complete with a copy of my deed and the original plat, explaining that my parcel was not, and had never been, part of the tract that was developed into lakeside meadows. My property predated their existence. For 9 years, that was the end of it. They sent me a letter every year, and every year I ignored it. I continued to pay my share for the road, grading directly to the gravel company, along with my original neighbors. The trouble started 2 years ago when Brenda Walsh was elected president. I'd seen her around, a woman in her late 50s who always seemed to be angry about something. She drove her golf cart too fast, spoke to service workers with a sneer, and seemed to believe that the volume of her voice was directly proportional to the validity of her argument. She was a renter, I would later learn, not an owner, but she had a charisma, a kind of furious energy that appealed to a certain type of person. The type who enjoys telling other people what to do. Her reign began with small things. She measured the height of everyone's grass. She issued a memo specifying the exact shade of beige that all front doors were required to be. She fined poor Mr. Henderson, a widower like me who lived 2 lots down, $200 because the garden gnome his granddaughter had given him was, in her words, tacky and inconsistent with the aesthetic vision of the community. Henderson, a gentleman in his 80s, was terrified. He paid the fine and put the gnome in his garage. I watched. I listened. I attended the HOA meetings via Zoom, my camera off, my microphone muted. I listened as she shouted down anyone who disagreed with her. I watched as she consolidated power, appointing her friends to the Architectural Review Committee and creating new fines out of thin air. She had a particular obsession with the original cabins, the ones like mine. She called us non-compliant holdouts. She hated that we weren't under her thumb. She hated the messy, organic reality of our existence in her world of beige uniformity. My first direct interaction with her was over my mailbox. It was the original mailbox my father had built, a miniature replica of the cabin itself, crafted from cedar and fieldstone. It was a work of art. I received a formal notice in the mail, a picture of my mailbox with a red circle around it. Violation. Non-standard mailbox. Fine. $50. Correction required within 14 days. I knew I could fight it. I knew my property wasn't in her jurisdiction. But fighting would mean engaging with her, entering her world of arguments and emotion. There was a better way, a quieter way. I wrote a check for $50 and mailed it to the HOA. I didn't correct the violation. 2 weeks later I got another notice. Failure to correct violation. Fine, $100. I wrote another check. This went on for 3 months. The fines escalated. 50, 100, 200. Each time I paid without comment, and with each check I sent, I was creating a record. I was building a file. In her mind she was winning. She was punishing the stubborn old man. In reality she was acknowledging, through the act of accepting my payments, a financial relationship that she would later use to claim authority. She was cashing the checks that would eventually hang her. I kept the receipts. That became my mantra. I have a filing cabinet in my study, 4 drawers of heavy oak. The top left drawer is labeled Cabin. Inside, there is a manila folder, now thick and heavy, labeled HOA. It contains every notice, every threatening letter, every newsletter filled with her smiling, self-important face. It contains photocopies of every check I sent her, front and back, showing the endorsement stamp of the Lakeside Meadows HOA. It contains my notes from the Zoom meetings, with dates, times, and direct quotes. It's a testament to obsessive record-keeping, the professional habit of a lifetime, applied to a personal problem. I kept the receipts because I knew, with the certainty of a surveyor setting a monument, that a day of reckoning would come. I just never imagined it would be this spectacular. The conflict over the $300 for road grading was the final straw. It was her attempt to formalize the informal, to absorb our old handshake agreement into her corporate structure. It was her attempt to finally, officially, bring my property under her control. When I sent my certified letter explaining, in painstaking detail, why she had no jurisdiction, I included copies of the original road maintenance agreement from 1975, signed by my father and the other original property owners. I included a canceled check from the previous year, showing my direct payment to the gravel company. On paper, it was an open and shut case. My property was exempt. I had fulfilled my obligation. Her response came not in a letter, but in an email. It was a single sentence, devoid of punctuation or capitalization. "We don't care about your old papers, pay the dues or else." Or else had arrived this morning, in the form of a man with bolt cutters. What Brenda didn't understand, what she could never understand, is that the old papers are the only thing that matters. In the end, the world isn't governed by shouting and hurt feelings. It's governed by what is written down. It's governed by the receipts. And I had kept every single one. After I returned to my porch, I picked up my phone. The video of Brenda's tirade had finished uploading. I saved a copy to a separate encrypted drive, then sent a link to my personal email, with the subject line, Evidence Package A. Then I dialed a number I hadn't dialed in 3 years. "Dave Surveying and Engineering. This is Dave." The voice on the other end was gruff, familiar, and exactly what I needed to hear. "Dave, it's Arthur." There was a pause, then a booming laugh. "Arthur, you old goat, I thought you'd be halfway to Florida by now wrestling alligators. Don't tell me you're finally bored of retirement and want your old job back." "Not exactly," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "I need a favor. I need you to act as my professional corroborator, and I need to access the county's digital archives, the full subscription, not the public portal." The humor in Dave's voice vanished, replaced by the focused tone of a professional. "What's going on, Arthur? You sound methodical." "I remember that tone. It's the tone you used when we found that developer in '98 had been moving boundary markers." "It's a similar situation," I said. "Just a bit more personal. I'm being told I don't own my own house." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Okay," Dave said, his voice low and serious. "Okay, Arthur. Your login and password for the archives will be in your inbox in 5 minutes. What else do you need?" "For now, just your eyes on some documents I'm going to send you. I need a second opinion, to make sure I'm not missing anything." "You've never missed anything in your life, Arthur, but send them over. Let's get to work." Hanging up the phone, I felt a familiar sensation settle over me. It was the feeling I used to get at the start of a complex project, a quiet, focused clarity. The anger and violation I had felt, watching those bolt cutters approach my lock, had receded, replaced by the cold, clean logic of the problem. Brenda had made it a fight. But she thought it was a fist fight, a messy, emotional brawl. She had no idea I was turning it into a chess match. I went inside and sat down at my desk. It's an old partner's desk, big enough for 2 people to work at. A relic from a time when people collaborated in the same room. Eleanor and I used to sit here. She paying bills, me drafting plans. Now her side was empty, holding only a framed photo of us on the day we closed on this land. I looked at her smiling face and I felt a pang of sadness, but also a surge of determination. This place was ours. It was on paper. I spent the next 8 hours in a state of deep, uninterrupted focus. I didn't stop for lunch. I just refilled my coffee mug and let the world outside my window disappear. I pulled up the Lakeside Meadows HOA founding documents, the articles of incorporation filed with the state in 1988. I read every word. Then I cross-referenced them with the master plat for the subdivision, the one Dave had just sent me a high-resolution scan of, and there it was, on page 3 of the master plat. In the section titled Exclusions and Encumbrances was a list of 7 parcel numbers. My parcel, 04-22-117-003, was the third one on the list. Next to it was a note, written in the precise architectural script of the original developer's engineer. Said parcels are pre-existing homesteads and are explicitly and perpetually excluded from all covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Lakeside Meadows subdivision. Perpetually, that was the word, not temporarily, not until the owner joins, but forever. It was a legal fortress, built into the very foundation of their community. Their own founding document, the one they supposedly revered, explicitly stated they had no power over me. It was better than I had even hoped. Any competent lawyer, any judge, any sane person would see this, and the case would be over. I printed the document, highlighted the section, and placed it on the growing pile of evidence on my desk. This was my failed warning, the proof that I had tried to show her the truth. I had sent her a simplified version of this fact in my certified letter. Her response, "We don't care about your old papers," was now evidence of willful ignorance, of a deliberate choice to proceed in the face of contradictory facts. But I didn't stop there. The professional in me, the part that always checks the cross streets and verifies the benchmarks, pushed me to keep digging. If she was this brazen about my property, what else was she hiding? What other rules did she think didn't apply to her? The problem with people who believe they are the law is that they rarely bother to follow the actual law. I started with her, Brenda Walsh. I ran a simple property search in our county for her name. Nothing. That was odd for an HOA president. Maybe the house was in her husband's name. I didn't know if she was married, so I did a broader search. I searched the address of the house she lived in, a large beige colonial, on the main circle of the subdivision, and that's when I found it, the bombshell. The owner of that property was not Brenda Walsh. It wasn't John Doe Walsh, or any individual at all. The owner was listed as Aspen Grove Holdings, LLC, with a mailing address in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I stared at the screen for a long moment. An LLC, a limited liability company, is a common way to hold investment properties. It's a shell. I ran a search on Aspen Grove Holdings. It was a ghost, a name on a piece of paper in a corporate filing office, designed to be anonymous. This meant Brenda Walsh was a tenant, a renter. My heart started beating a little faster. I went back to the HOA's Articles of Incorporation, the document I had been reading just an hour before. I scanned down to Article 3, Membership. The language was crystal clear. Membership in the association shall be limited to the record title owners of lots within the Lakeside Meadows subdivision. A member must be a person or entity whose name appears on the deed as recorded in the County Register of Deeds. No other person, including tenants or long-term lessees, shall be considered a member for the purposes of voting or holding office. I read it again and again. The words seemed to lift off the page. This was it. This was the whole thing. It wasn't just that she had no authority over me. It was that she had no authority at all. Her entire presidency, every fine she had levied, every lien she had filed, every threat she had made, was built on a foundation of fraud. She was a non-member who had seized control of the board. She was a usurper. Every action she had taken as president was on paper null and void. I leaned back in my chair, the old wood groaning in protest. I felt a wave of something that wasn't quite elation. It was a heavier, more profound feeling. It was the feeling of seeing the entire board, every piece, every possible move, laid out in front of me. Brenda thought she was playing checkers. She had no idea I had just found the documents proving she wasn't even a legal player on the board. The game was already over. All that was left was the slow, methodical process of showing her. I printed the property record for her address. I printed the relevant page from the Articles of Incorporation. I highlighted both. These went on the top of the pile, my bombshell. I was about to close the laptop when a new email popped up. It was from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply HOA meeting. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it. The email was short. I heard what she did this morning. I can't let this happen. I have recordings. She can't know I sent this. Attached was an audio file. I clicked play. The audio was slightly muffled, the classic sound of a phone recording from inside a pocket. But Brenda's voice was unmistakable, loud and sharp. "Make an example of him," her voice said. "That old man in the pre-existing cabin, Arthur, he thinks his old papers protect him. We'll see about that. We need a new gazebo for the community pool, and the bids are coming in high. If we foreclose on his property for the unpaid road dues, we can sell it and use the proceeds to fund the gazebo project. It's a prime lakefront lot. It will more than cover it. We just need to vote to authorize the lien. All in favor?" There was a murmur of assent. A lone, hesitant voice, a woman, said, "Brenda, are you sure this is legal?" Brenda's voice turned to ice. "Carol, are you questioning my leadership? It's legal because we are making it legal. We are the board. We decide." I stopped the recording. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just misinterpreting the rules. She was actively conspiring to steal my property, to fund a vanity project. This wasn't incompetence. This was malice. This was criminal. I saved the audio file, renaming it Evidence Package B. The anonymous emailer was clearly the hesitant voice on the recording. "Carol." I looked up the HOA board members. Carol Jenkins, secretary, the disillusioned insider. Just then my phone rang again. It was a local number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later a text message appeared. "Mr. Arthur, this is Deputy Miller from the Sheriff's Department. We met this morning. Mrs. Walsh has been at the station for the last 3 hours, demanding we come and arrest you for trespassing. We have explained the situation to her, but she is insistent. For your own safety and to create a clear record, it might be wise for you to come down and make a formal statement. This is purely voluntary, sir." Brenda had called the authorities, the final, classic move of the performative tyrant. She believed the police were her personal army, there to enforce her will. She was about to learn another hard lesson. The law is not a performance. I gathered a few specific documents from my pile. A copy of my driver's license, showing my address. A copy of the deed to my cabin, and my most recent property tax receipt, clearly marked paid in full. I put them in a crisp, new manila folder. I didn't need the bombshells yet. This was an earlier chapter of the story. This was the chapter where two opposing narratives would be presented to a neutral authority. Hers, built on emotion and assertion. Mine, built on paper. When I walked into the sheriff's station, the first thing I saw was Brenda. She was at the front desk, her face red, her hands gesturing wildly as she spoke to the sergeant on duty. "A squatter, a dangerous old man. He's probably got guns in there. You have to do something." The sergeant looked up as I approached, his face a mask of weary professionalism. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm Arthur," I said quietly. "I believe you're expecting me." Brenda spun around, her eyes widening in fury. "There he is. Arrest him. That's the man who is trespassing on my HOA's property." A young deputy, the same one from that morning, appeared from a back office. It was Deputy Miller. He had a look on his face that I recognized from my younger days, dealing with difficult contractors, a carefully neutral expression that barely concealed a deep-seated frustration. "Mrs. Walsh, please," he said, his voice tired. "We've been over this. It's a civil matter." "It is not a civil matter. It is a criminal matter. He is defying a legal foreclosure," she screeched. The few other people in the waiting area were now staring openly. Deputy Miller ignored her and turned to me. "Mr. Arthur, thank you for coming in. Would you mind stepping into my office?" I followed him into a small, cluttered room. He closed the door, muffling Brenda's continued tirade. He gestured to a chair. "Sir, I apologize for this. As I said on the phone, she's been persistent." "I understand, Deputy," I said. "She's a very determined woman." "That's one word for it," he muttered, then caught himself. "So here's the situation. She's presented us with a document she claims is a notice of foreclosure from her HOA. It looks like something she printed off the internet. She claims your property was sold and you're refusing to leave." I didn't say anything. I simply opened my folder and laid the 3 documents on his desk: the deed, my driver's license, the tax receipt. He picked up the deed first. He read it carefully, his eyes scanning the legal description, the date, the signatures. He spent a full minute with it. Then he picked up my license and compared the name and address. Finally, he looked at the tax receipt. He placed all 3 back on the desk in a neat pile. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. He looked at me, and for the first time, the professional mask dropped. He looked less like a cop and more like a young man who was in way over his head with small-town drama. "Sir," he said, "on paper, this is one of the cleanest property records I've ever seen. Deed is from '62, taxes are paid, your ID matches the address. As far as the state of this county is concerned, that cabin is yours, free and clear." "That is my understanding as well," I said. "Her entire claim rests on this HOA's authority," he continued, thinking out loud, "which, as a pre-existing property, they probably don't have over you anyway. But even if they did, an HOA can't just foreclose on a house. Not like this. There's a whole legal process. Courts have to be involved. It takes months, sometimes years. They can't just print a notice and sell your house for a few $1,000s in back dues. That's not how any of this works." I nodded. "I am aware." He looked down at my documents, then back at me. A subtle shift occurred in his demeanor. The weariness was replaced by a different kind of energy, a dawning realization. He was no longer seeing a querulous old man and a hysterical woman. He was seeing a victim and a perpetrator. "Mr. Arthur," he said, his voice now formal and official, "would you be willing to make a formal statement? I need to create a report. I need your version of events on the record." "Of course, Deputy," I said. "That's why I came. And I would like to file a formal complaint against Brenda Walsh for criminal trespass, attempted theft, and harassment. I would also like to add that this morning she brought 2 men with her and instructed them to use bolt cutters to destroy my personal property, specifically the lock on my front door, in an attempt to gain illegal entry. I have a video recording of the entire incident, including her admission." The deputy's eyes widened slightly. He picked up his pen. "Okay, sir," he said, pulling a fresh report form from a drawer. "Let's start from the beginning, and please, be as detailed as possible." I spent the next hour walking Deputy Miller through the entire history. The mailbox finds, the certified letter, the old paper's email, the events of that morning. I gave him the names of the locksmith company as best I could remember. I told him about Mr. Peters, the new owner. I didn't give him the bombshell about Brenda being a renter yet. That was for a different venue, a more public stage. For now, I was just building my case, brick by legal brick. When I was finished, he handed me a card with a case number on it. "We're filing this as an informational report for now, but I've cross-referenced it with complaints for harassment and attempted fraud," he said. "The district attorney will get a copy of this. Her story is inconsistent. Your story is backed by documents. In these situations, the documents usually win." As I walked out of the station, Brenda was gone. The sergeant at the desk gave me a small, tight-lipped nod. It was a tiny gesture, but it was a gesture of validation. The wheels of actual justice, slow and bureaucratic as they were, had started to turn. Brenda had called the authorities to be her audience. Instead, they had become my first official witness. When I got home, there was a pie on my porch steps. It was a blueberry pie, still warm, with a note tucked under the edge of the tin. "From a neighbor, we're with you." I didn't know who left it, but it felt like a signal. The tide was turning. The next day it began. Mr. Henderson, the owner of the banished garden gnome, appeared at my door, twisting his hat in his hands. "Arthur," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I saw the sheriff's car here yesterday. I saw her leave the station, and she looked like she'd chewed on a wasp. Is it true? Are you fighting back?" "I'm just presenting the facts, George," I told him. He took a deep breath. "I've been so scared of her," he said, "ever since she made my Mary move her gnome, the one our little granddaughter painted for her before she passed. But seeing you stand up to her, it gives me courage." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "This is a list," he said, "a list of all the illegal fines she's issued, the ones she made up in her executive sessions. People have been paying them because they're afraid. But we've been keeping track. Durs." He was the fearful ally, the conscience of the community. His list was another piece of the puzzle, showing a pattern of behavior, a history of abuse of power. I took the list and thanked him. "George," I said, "this is very helpful. Will you be willing to testify to this, if it becomes necessary?" He straightened his shoulders. "My Mary would have wanted me to. Yes, I will." 2 hours later I received another visitor. A woman I recognized as Carol Jenkins, the HOA secretary. She was pale and nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder as if expecting Brenda to leap out of the bushes. She was clutching a large accordion file to her chest. "Mr. Arthur," she stammered, "I'm the one who sent you the audio file. I am so sorry. I voted with her on that lien. She bullies everyone. She told us it was the only way, and if we didn't vote with her, she'd find a way to fine us or have us removed from the board." "It's all right, Carol," I said gently. "It takes courage to admit a mistake. It takes more to try and fix it." Tears welled in her eyes. "I can't be part of this anymore. Stealing a man's home. It's wrong. It's just wrong. I have everything here." She thrust the file at me. "The real meeting minutes, not the sanitized ones she posts online, the ones where she orders me not to record her motions. The financials, showing where she's been using the HOA debit card for personal expenses. It's all in there. Please, you have to do something. You have to stop her." The disillusioned insider had officially broken ranks. The coalition was forming. I now had testimony, financial records, and official documents. My folder was no longer just a defensive tool. It was becoming a battering ram. The final piece fell into place that evening. Brenda, predictably, made her final, desperate move. Humiliated at the sheriff's station and feeling her power base begin to crumble, she went nuclear. A man in a cheap suit served me with papers. She had hired a lawyer, or at least someone who passed for one, and had filed for an emergency lien and a court-ordered public auction. The papers were riddled with errors, citing bylaws that didn't exist and statutes that didn't apply, but they were official-looking enough to scare most people, and she had scheduled the auction for Friday, on the steps of the county courthouse. She had even taken out an ad in the local paper. Public auction, lakefront property, foreclosure sale. It was a breathtakingly audacious act, a public declaration of war. She was trying to use the spectacle of the law to legitimize her fraud. She was taking the fight to my home turf, the world of public records and official proceedings. It was the single greatest strategic mistake she could have possibly made. She was moving the battle from the shadows of her petty tyranny into the bright, unforgiving sunlight of the public square, and she had no idea I had spent my entire life preparing for this exact moment. I took the papers, thanked the process server, and closed the door. I picked up the phone and called a real lawyer, a man who specialized in property law and had a reputation like a shark. I explained the situation, then emailed him the link to my evidence folder. He called me back 10 minutes later. He wasn't laughing, but I could hear the smile in his voice. "Mr. Arthur," he said, "this is the most beautifully documented case of HOA overreach and outright fraud I have ever seen. It's a work of art. What she's done is the legal equivalent of trying to rob a bank with a water pistol. And the bank is also a police station, and the teller is a judge." "What's our next move?" I asked. "Our next move?" he replied. "We do nothing. We let her proceed. We let her gather her crowd and stand on those courthouse steps. We let her build the stage for her own humiliation, and then, at the height of her triumph, we bring the curtain down. Just be there on Friday, Mr. Arthur, and bring your folder." Friday was a beautiful, crisp autumn day. The sun shone brightly on the granite steps of the county courthouse. Brenda had managed to draw a crowd. There were a handful of her supporters, looking smug and triumphant. There were a number of my neighbors, including George Henderson and a nervous-looking Carol Jenkins, standing in a small, defiant cluster. and there were curious onlookers, drawn by the ad in the paper, hoping to snag a bargain. Brenda was in her element. She was holding court, dressed in a severe pantsuit, a sheaf of papers in her hand. She had a professional auctioneer with her, a man with a booming voice and a cheap toupee. Mr. Peters, the new owner from my cabin, was there, looking eager and greedy. My lawyer, Mr. Franklin, and I stood at the edge of the crowd. He was a tall man with a calm demeanor that seemed to radiate competence. With us were Dave, my old surveying partner, and Deputy Miller, who was there in an official capacity, to keep the peace, as he put it. The auctioneer banged a small gavel. "All right, folks, let's get started. Today we have a prime piece of lakefront property, parcel number 04-22-117-003, sold today by order of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association to satisfy a delinquent lien." Brenda stepped forward and gave a short, rehearsed speech. She spoke of community standards, of the importance of rules, of the unfortunate but necessary actions they were forced to take when one individual decided he was above the law. She even managed to produce a few tears as she spoke of the heavy burden of leadership. It was a masterclass in performative victimhood. "We will open the bidding at $5,572, the amount of the outstanding lien and fees." The auctioneer boomed. "Do I hear 5,500? Mr. Peters shot his hand up. "Here. I have 5,500. Do I hear 6,000? This was our cue. Mr. Franklin and I walked calmly through the crowd. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie. All the anger was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. "Excuse me," Mr. Franklin said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. The auctioneer paused, annoyed. "This sale cannot proceed," Franklin said clearly. Brenda rushed forward. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you?" "I am Lawrence Franklin, counsel for Arthur Penhaligon, the legal owner of this property, and this entire proceeding is fraudulent." A gasp went through the crowd. Brenda's face went from triumphant to furious. "This is a legal auction. We have the paperwork. We have the lien. What you have," Franklin said, his voice dropping a degree, "is a collection of worthless papers that constitute a roadmap to multiple civil and criminal charges. Let's start with the basics." He turned to the auctioneer. "Sir, I am handing you a certified copy of the deed for this property, held by my client since 1962. I am also handing you a certified copy of the Lakeside Meadows Master Plat, which explicitly and perpetually excludes this parcel from the HOA's jurisdiction. If you proceed with this sale, you will be complicit in the felony of attempting to sell property you do not own." The auctioneer took the documents, his face paling as he read them. He looked at Brenda, then at the papers, then back at Brenda. He slowly lowered his gavel. But Franklin wasn't done. He turned to the crowd. "For those of you who have been victimized by this woman, you should know that her authority is based on a lie." He held up another document. "This is the property record for the house Brenda Walsh lives in. It is owned by a shell corporation in Wyoming. She is a tenant. According to Article 3 of the Lakeside Meadows bylaws, she is not a member of the HOA and is therefore ineligible to vote or hold any office, including president." This was the moment. The collapse. The mask didn't just drop, it shattered. Brenda's face went utterly blank. The furious, confident energy that was her lifeblood seemed to drain out of her, leaving behind a hollow, slack-jawed confusion. Her supporters were looking at her, their smug smiles replaced with looks of bewilderment. They were looking for a denial, an explanation, a trademark explosion of righteous fury. But there was none. She just stood there, the papers falling from her limp hand and scattering on the courthouse steps. She had no idea she had built her entire world on a throne of lies, and someone had just pulled the deed out from under it. Deputy Miller stepped forward. "Okay, folks, I think that's enough for today. The auction is canceled. Please disperse." He walked over to a stunned Brenda. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now devoid of any sympathy, "I think you and I need to have another talk. And this time, You might want to bring a lawyer. A real one. The aftermath was swift and absolute. Legally, it was a rout. The district attorney, armed with my evidence package, Carol's files, and George Henderson's testimony, charged Brenda with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The HOA's lawyer dropped them as a client so fast he probably broke the sound barrier. The state agency that oversees HOAs launched a full audit, uncovering years of financial mismanagement and abuse. Brenda, it turned out, had a history of this. She was a serial tyrant, moving from community to community, gaining power, causing chaos, and then fleeing before the consequences caught up with her. This time, her paper trail had caught up first. She eventually pleaded guilty to lesser charges to avoid a longer prison sentence, receiving probation and a court order to pay full restitution for the embezzled funds and all of my legal fees. She was also barred from ever serving on any board or fiduciary position again. On paper, her reign was officially over. The community began to heal almost immediately. With Brenda gone, the edifice of fear she had built crumbled overnight. A special meeting was called. Carol Jenkins, no longer nervous, stood before the community and laid out the full extent of Brenda's fraud, using the very documents I had given her. The remaining board members who had been complicit in her schemes resigned in disgrace. A new board was elected, with Carol as the reluctant but capable president, and George Henderson on the Architectural Review Committee. Their first act was to vote to rescind every fine Brenda had ever issued and refund the money. Their second act was to draft a formal public letter of apology to me, which they published in the local paper. George's gnome, I'm told, now has a place of honor in his front garden, complete with a tiny hand-painted sign that reads, "Never again." As for me, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but with a subtle change. I was no longer just the quiet old man in the woods. I was Arthur, the man who had faced down the dragon. Neighbors who had once just waved nervously now stopped to chat. The man who left the pie on my porch turned out to be a young father of 3, who Brenda had fined for having a basketball hoop. He and his family now come over for cookouts. Carol and I have become good friends, bonding over a shared love of process and order. We sometimes have coffee on my porch, and she tells me about the slow, steady work of untangling Brenda's mess and building a real community. The other day, I was cleaning out my study, and I came across the HOA folder. It's thicker now, filled with legal filings, court orders, and letters of thanks from my neighbors. I took out the original deed from 1962, the master plat with its beautiful, exclusionary language, and the property record showing Aspen Grove Holdings, LLC. I framed them. They now hang on the wall of my study, a triptych of truth. They are a monument not to a victory but to a principle, that reality is based on facts, not feelings. That order eventually asserts itself over chaos. I still have the heavy brass lock that Brenda tried to destroy. The locksmith she'd hired after realizing the situation refused to touch it. I cleaned off the scratches from the bolt cutters. It's a beautiful piece of machinery, a testament to a time when things were built to last. Sometimes I just hold it in my hand. It feels solid, real. It's a reminder that some things are not for sale. Some things are not subject to a vote. Some things are simply yours, written down on a piece of paper, protected by the quiet, unyielding power of the law. I still have the receipts, and now I have my piece, on paper and in fact.